What's going on, guys? I wanted to share with you two experiences, two comments in particular that have come my way in therapy over the years that were really, really hard for me to hear, that I thought, especially in retrospect, were far more hurtful and damaging than they were helpful and encouraging or uplifting or perspective building. One came, I guess not from a therapist, but a doctor in an ER in a psych ward. So I guess in the psych ward, but I did have to go through the ER. I was put on like a 72-hour hold. At this time in my mental health experience, I was relatively new in that I'd never really had a breakdown of the sort that I was having. Full-blown, major depressive episode, massive mental breakdown that included tons of anxiety, depersonalization, panic, lack of sleep, and then just more importantly for this story, intense suicidal ideations. I've talked about it in the past, but it's been a while. We have some new people, and I just want to share what this doctor said to me on my third day there. So I'm checked in, and I'm going through all of these horrific thoughts, processing feelings that I have no business processing, and that I just didn't have the tools. And I'm envisioning myself staying in the psych ward forever. I'm envisioning myself being made to and forced to take medications that will numb and sedate me. And given the state I was already in, which was incredibly numb and sedated and apathetic and detached, I just thought I would go crazy and I would die there. So one of the things I did was try my best to not look too crazy, because I had seen someone get grabbed up in the psych ward and put into I don't know about a straitjacket, but restrained. I had to watch someone get restrained. It was very anxiety provoking, again, in a time where I felt unsafe. That's why I was there. But my anxiety was as high as you can imagine. And I'm sitting in my room, and I have this incredibly flat disposition. And if you look into my eyes, you can just tell there's not much going on there. There's a void. And the doctor comes in on day 3, and I'd been crying all morning and sitting there thinking my life was over. And he asked me how I was doing. And I told him that I didn't feel good, and I was scared, and I felt very down and hopeless. And his response to me, which is part 1, right, which is the first story of this video, but his response to me was, well, you don't seem that bad. There's some people in here that are really, really bad, and you don't seem that bad. This simple comment, while I wonder now if it was intended to give me some perspective that might enlighten me or it might put me at ease, it was so discouraging at the time, and it was so disheartening. And in a space where I just wanted someone to tell me that they saw me and they could tell that I was hurting and they believed me and that it was going to be okay, and just help me own the space I was in, the sadness that I was experiencing. This doctor wanted me to know that he didn't think I seemed that bad, and for me to be mindful that there are other people that are definitely worse, which I don't doubt that there were. But in that moment, it was a really, really dismissive comment, in my opinion, that was really, really sad and discouraging. And for someone to make a comment like that to me at the time, without knowing me, without having spent more than a day or two popping in for a minute or two to see me, I thought was so callous, and I thought was fairly insensitive, and maybe even a little unprofessional. I don't know. All I know is it hurt. Because if you've ever been depressed, if you've ever struggled with suicidal ideations, if you've ever struggled with insomnia and just dangerously feeble anxiety, the kind of anxiety that can be pushed over the edge with a gust of wind, then you know how painful it is. You know that it's hard to last a minute in that space of intense darkness, intense despair. It's hard to last an hour, a day. And hope can be a fleeting thing. And so for this doctor to come in, and after I'd been in this breakdown for months, tell me, culminating or leading up to this forced medical stay at the psych ward, for him to just say, you don't seem that bad, it hurt. And I think he could have said something different in that space. And I would encourage everyone, if you see someone hurting, I wouldn't let them know that they don't seem that bad. It's not going to help. So that was one. The other story that I want to bring up that I thought was one of the worst things a therapist ever said to me is cut from a similar cloth, but the context is a little bit different. So I'm 3.5 months into my mental breakdown, into my clinical depression, all the things I mentioned before. And I'm seeing this therapist grasping at straws to hang on. I was in a space at the time where it sincerely hurt to be awake. It hurt to be awake. It hurt to breathe. It hurt to exist to such a degree that I was nearly paralyzed, completely dysfunctional. And I was seeing this therapist hanging on by a thread, truly, fantasizing about death every second of every day. So uncomfortable. And I asked her, I said, when is this going to be over? When will I get better? Because at the time I was going to bed every day saying, maybe tomorrow it will stop. Maybe tomorrow I won't want to kill myself. Maybe tomorrow life will have some color again. I would just hold on to the hope that I would wake up and the nightmare that I was on, or in rather, would end. And so I asked her, like, how much longer? When is this going to stop? And she looked at me with these eyes and she goes, oh, Noah, it's only been 3 months. This is probably just the beginning. It's still early. You haven't even been depressed that long. Now, from her clinical experience, she understands that major depressive episodes, mental breakdowns, these things can last a lot longer than 3 months. I didn't know that at the time. All I knew is that I could barely imagine surviving the hour. Truly. My ability to see past my pain at that time was gone. I couldn't. It fully engulfs me. So I'm internally thinking, how do I not end it all by tonight? And her response to my question, when will this be over, was, oh, it just started. It hasn't been that long, 3 months. And given what I said earlier, and I still believe, and I believe that other people think this also, a minute can feel like a day, or an hour, I guess. An hour can feel like a day when you're in acute mental health crisis, and a day can feel like a week can feel like a month. You get what I'm trying to say. Time moves slow when you're in tremendous suffering, and I was in tremendous suffering at that time. And her choice to, what I thought at the time, was to minimize the suffering I was in and to emphasize that it was only the beginning, as if like, didn't you know? Don't you realize this just started? It hasn't been that bad that long. I thought was incredibly detached and void of empathy for me at that time. And it took my nil hope. It took the fleeting fleck, the skosh of hope that I had, and it squashed it. I remember leaving that session truly convinced that my life was over and that I would never make it out of this. If 3 months was barely anything, and I'd barely survived that long in my head, what would I do with the reality that it can take from 6 months to a year, and for some people with treatment resistant, which I wound up being, it can take more than a year. I thought that was a bad decision by her. And if you have ever seen a therapist or worked with a mental health professional or a medical professional and received a comment like this, I just want to empathize with you for a moment. And I want you to know that that I don't think it's okay. I don't think that's right. And I don't think that's how any of us should be spoken to in that state. I think what I needed, or certainly what I wanted, was just reassurance. I didn't want lies. I didn't want them to paint a picture that wasn't true. But given the unique nature of mood disorders for all of us, as far as when they start, when they end, how they manifest, how we cope, how we present, it's incredibly individual. And so to be told the things I was told and to be spoken to the way I was spoken to, given the state I was in, was heartbreaking. And one thing that we don't need when we're in that space is anything else to be sad about. I used to tell people that if you knew just how fragile and miserable I was, you would do nothing to make it worse. You would certainly be mindful of how you spoke to me and how you interacted with me to just minimize my stress and my pain. And I stand by that. We are we are delicate people in those spaces. So if you've ever been dismissed or spoken down to a bit, or received a comment that seemed insensitive and it hurt, just know that I'm here. I get it. I understand. I don't think it's right. Now, it's much easier for me in hindsight to look back and put what they were trying to say at least in perspective. But when you're in that delicate space of mental blackness, you can't process that way. You can't modulate your emotions and regulate things and not personalize things. You're fragile. So extra tender care, I think, is important for anyone dealing with acute mental illness like I was and like many of us are. So if you are healthy right now, be thoughtful of how you communicate to people. Be thoughtful as to whether or not you're going from pity and sympathy and trying to match emotions to just being empathetic and standing and holding space with someone who's suffering. I would encourage everyone not to minimize other people's suffering, regardless of what their personal opinion is about that person's state of being. If you're not in their head, which is a rhetorical statement, right? It's a tongue-in-cheek statement, then you just don't know, and that's okay. But don't pretend to know, and don't downplay other people's pain. It'll make them afraid to be open and honest with you, I think. And if you're suffering right now, like I once was, and like I still do between my ears, just to varying degrees, just know that I believe in you. I do believe it can get better. I certainly have seen my mental health improve from that time, and I've had wonderful stretches of contentment and stability, and then I've slid back and forth, but I believe it can get better, and I believe life can be worth living. In the comments below, share with me a couple of the more insensitive or unhelpful comments therapists have ever made to you in a moment of acute crisis or in a moment of you opening up, in a moment of vulnerability. Have you had similar experiences to me? Have people said much worse in a professional setting? And just know that I appreciate you. Otherwise, just check in. Again, my name is Noah, and on this channel, I just try to share my life and share my thoughts with you guys, and just know that I appreciate you. So I look forward to reading your stories. I'm rooting for all of us to do our best to make the next right decision in our day-to-day lives and to manage our stress and our mental health and our physical health and all of that the best we can, the healthiest way we can. All right. Thank you for listening. I'll see you guys in the next video.